Buenos días de nuevo. Pasamos al segundo panel de esta última jornada dentro del curso de Políticas Culturales Europeas y los retos hacia la integración. En este caso hablamos sobre una ciudadanía activa y participativa a través de la cultura y el difícil equilibrio de la democracia representativa y participativa. Tenemos para empezar este panel con nosotros a Guido Orlandini, que es secretario general del ICLS, de Intercultural Communication and Leadership School. Ha sido miembro de la plataforma para la Europa Intercultural y principal administrador del Consejo de Europa. He tenido también, además, la suerte y el honor de compartir con él trabajo sobre cuál debe ser el futuro y el papel de la sociedad civil y el futuro de la cultura en el desarrollo de políticas europeas en el campo de algunas plataformas, últimamente en una de las plataformas que se ha mencionado aquí, The Voices of Culture, las voces de la cultura. Y bueno, desde que lo conocí he visto su espíritu crítico, su pasión por la cultura, cómo unir esa pasión con el tema de la participación ciudadana, la democracia y muy especialmente los derechos humanos. Guido, muchas gracias por haber aceptado nuestra invitación y por compartir con nosotros tu experiencia. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Miguel. Thank you to the organizers, and I must say it is a great honor to speak in such a distinguished framework, not only architecturally, but because of the content of the lectures which I've heard over the past 2 days. I think I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I would also like to thank the interpreters for making it possible for us not just to be present, but to understand each other. I have asked the organizers to distribute a document to you, which I would ask you, please don't read it now. It's 16 pages long. It may be a bit too much and might distract you from what I have to say to you. It is a document which 3 of the most powerful political figures in Europe went to celebrate about a month ago in the small island of Ventotene in Italy. It was written between 1941 and 1944, and it is a call for a federal Europe. It is an interesting document because you will find it has principles which are totally revolutionary in it. It also has some prophetic visions in it, as if they knew at the time what might happen after many years of European cooperation to put the edifice of European cooperation in danger. I think the edifice is in danger today. I think these are not normal times, and I think that we need to look outside the box for new ways and new solutions to forwarding what probably has been the most deserving project of the past century, not only for Europe, but for the world. We hear very often from the press, European solidarity has broken down. It is true that Europe is divided in various camps, especially for the moment on economic lines, but at the same time with a worrying trend towards a right-wing, xenophobic discourse which is suddenly becoming respectable, at least in the eyes of some. We thought we had killed those ghosts. It is not so. Indeed, I'm afraid that we are going back to a more normal system of relations between states, which Lord Palmerston evoked in his speech to the House of Commons already 170 years ago. States have no eternal allies, they have no eternal or perpetual enemies. States have eternal interests. The egotism of national states is a constant of human history. The European experiment was a surprising instance of generosity, probably born of the shock which Europe underwent during the years of the Second World War. The forgetfulness of that shock might again put in danger this good disposition towards positive cooperation. We have also a situation which we did not expect, which is that of intense migration towards Europe. Intense migration for two reasons. For the danger, the physical danger in which people find themselves near our borders. I'm thinking of the millions of displaced people in Syria. And for the economic displacement, which people are undergoing because they are looking for a better future. We will have eventually to come to grips with the problem of dividing these two categories of people. It may be not politically correct, but we will not be able to accept all the misery of the world, even though we are a very rich continent and we are a continent where life is good. And I will speak more about this later. We will not, I hope, ever give up our openness towards refugees, towards distress and the fear for their life, which some people are undergoing. But if the figures by the United Nations, which says that Africa, at the end of this century, will have 3.5 billion inhabitants, we may have to rethink the way in which we let people in to our borders on the basis of economic need. This map gives you an idea of how many migrants or people of foreign origin there are in our member countries. I don't expect you to look at the figures. The decimals might be wrong. I think the general impression should be that people of foreign origin are a reality in Europe today, be it intra-European migration or extra-European migration. We all are living in multicultural societies. This multiculturalism has bred xenophobia. Some people are using simplistic discourses to generate hate towards the other. These are the first which came to my mind. I've left one blank. I could have left many more. I'm sure that if you look inside yourselves and if you look at the common discourse in some of our press, you will find many more reasons why we should be hating immigrants. They're terrorists, they're taking our jobs, they're preying on social security. This archaic idea they're stealing our women, a very masculine point of view. They're dirty, they're diseased, they're different. The real problem is that they're different, and that we all have some difficulty in accepting difference on an equal footing. We tend to say, the press tends to say, the media tend to say, that the ones who are the most radicalized and who are xenophobic have poor education, they are unemployed, they feel that they are competing with the immigrants, they have bad housing, and that they are defending themselves against the encroaching of new competition on their limited space of social security. This may be true, but somebody is manipulating this process. The ones who are manipulating the process are not poor. They are not disenfranchised. They are intelligent. They are diabolically intelligent, in fact. And to some extent, we should be wary of letting them into our house. When I see that in the European Parliament, we have parliamentarians who would not subscribe to the Charter of Universal Rights, I think that we are giving them the instruments to beat us with. If you don't like the rules of the club, you're not in the club. Again, this may be politically difficult to express. It is not proper. We should let Mr. Farage rant on about his ideas of xenophobia inside the European Parliament while he's earning €13,000 a month. But at the same time, I think we should condemn his attitude, and if possible, we should kick him out. And we have to depict, of course, an image of the others. The Council of Europe, 20 years ago, when I was still working there, had a campaign which was called All Different and All Equal, and which tried to bring down stereotypes towards the development of common values. Common values which, of course, should be based on human rights, but it was especially trying to bring down this idea that some people may be different. Now, there is very often in the media a depiction of what I call the electronic immigrant. Now, the electronic immigrant lives inside the television. He's being saved by the Coast Guard on the south coast of Italy, or he's hanging underneath a truck coming from Greece to wealthy Europe, or in some cases, he's walking around the train station looking for a place to sleep. Some people are in that situation. But as you saw before, some 10% of Europeans are immigrants. So what do immigrants really do in Europe? I'll tell you, they work. They run their companies. They produce nearly 10% of GNP. That's something like 1,500 billion euro a year produced by immigrants. They contribute to social security, of course. And because they are a young population, they generally take out from social security less than what they put in. So the electronic immigrant is one thing. The real immigrant is probably at home doing his income tax return. His kids go to school. They do their shopping. These families, they look for houses. In Italy, we have 5.7 million immigrants. If they were to leave tomorrow, I think some hospitals would break down. We would be lacking nurses, of course. Who would be looking after the old and needy people? We have 700,000 badanti, they call them in Italy, which means carers. We have 700,000 immigrants looking after old age people. Send them home? Yes. Who will do the job? So with immigrants, I think, we need to develop a social compact, a set of common rules, which they live by, we live by. Of course, most of them already do so. They understand that we are in countries where the rule of law exists. And they abide by the law, by and large. But because our society is constantly looking for enemies, some fringes of the political discourse are trying to create this enemy. A Romanian steals from a house, a few million Romanians are thieves. An Albanian does the same, they're all dangerous. We were afraid of the Romanian mafia, then we were afraid of the Albanian mafia. Now we're afraid of the Russian mafia, the Ukrainian mafia. We keep looking for enemies, not to speak about the triads and the Chinese danger. We live in a situation where creating fear brings some political advantage. So there isn't a culture of creating fear. However, on the side of the immigrants, we need them to be cooperative. They cannot expect to encapsulate themselves in a comfort zone which is homogeneous and excludes the majority. And they cannot expect to take over our countries. I say our because I was reading in The Economist last month, there was an interview by a sociologist to a group, I think it was Mr. Bassan Tibi, who is a Syrian professor. He was interviewing a group of Syrian refugees. Some of them made the following consideration. The earth belongs to God. So Germany belongs to Allah. Allah gave us Germany as a refuge, but not the Germans. So we must impose the rule of God on this country. This probably would create a bit of resentment in the German population. but it is not a new discourse. In 1630, when the Pilgrim Fathers went to America, their discourse was, this land is our land. They forgot that there were 30 million Indians living there. And indeed, in the Declaration of Independence, they speak about Indian savages. It was legitimate to kill the Indians because they did not share our beliefs and religion. And ultimately, 30 million Indians died because of this way of looking at things and because it was acceptable to consider a human being inferior just because he was different. Now, who is responding to these artificially created fears? Nationalist and populist parties, the far right. We're seeing the brown shirts here and there around Europe again. And they have some very structured arguments which repeat themselves from country to country, like immigrants are a security problem, immigrants are a threat just because they are immigrants, multiculturalism and multi-ethnicity are unacceptable because they weaken our people, our economy, our politics. We are rooted in Christian and Western values. In a country like Spain, which had the Arabs and the Muslims here for 600 or 700 years, it is a bit strange because to cleanse that, we burned people alive for many centuries. But we were Christians. The main group which is singled out as dangerous, of course, are the Muslims, because of the different religious roots and because Islam is a very different view of the world compared to what we are used to. We will speak more about that maybe later. So, but the immigrants need to understand that they are not different. They should not behave differently, just from a sense or a mistaken sense of pride. I think we need to teach the immigrants the local language properly. I think we can therefore produce the necessary teaching material which we would use in those structures where we are holding immigrants, sometimes for months, without instructing them on anything. People are wasting months of their life in a holding center. When they come out, they don't know the language, they don't know the laws, they don't know the social compact, they become aliens. That time should be used usefully. I would hope that we can put European money into developing tuition for these groups, especially because this kind of tuition could easily be replicated for all the member states. They all have similar problems. They solve them differently. Some have more money, like Norway. They give immigrants nice houses and good facilities. Some have little money and they keep them in deplorable conditions. But the objective of this period should be to develop in the would-be immigrants an acceptance of the local framework, and including in particular the space which religion has in human relations. We cannot forget that people have a spiritual framework, at least a small one. I'm not particularly a believer. I like the idea of a secular state divided from religion, but I would respect those who have a firm and strong belief. And this also the immigrants must learn to do. We respect their belief, they should respect ours. So why could we use intercultural dialogue to do this? And what have we been doing at ICLS? We've been doing a bit of an experiment. First of all, we believe that intercultural dialogue is necessary. We believe that it goes both ways. I speak to you if you want to speak to me. Otherwise, it's a monologue and no longer a dialogue. We believe intercultural dialogue can reduce the possibility of conflicts because it is easier to have a fight with somebody I don't understand. In England in the 60s, it was very popular after going to the pub and being drunk enough to go out packy bashing, hitting the odd Pakistani or brown-skinned person in the street beating him up. It was normal. We see this kind of phenomenon resurging, and I think it's a dangerous development, which we should do a lot in our power to stop. But if we don't know each other, we cannot cooperate. So intercultural dialogue is a precondition for intercultural cooperation, which implicitly means a shared sense of citizenship. So who are the actors in this new kind of developing renewed social framework? I think that's good. It woke everybody up. Okay, that's fine. So I think there is a role to play, of course, for politics. There is a great role to play for civil society, because when politics does not have the answers, it tends to turn towards civil society and hopes that the civil society will take up the slack and find solutions. The intellectuals in the universities, they should develop forms of cooperation, forms of tuition, but also religious institutions have a role to play. Too often we exclude from the practical activities on the ground faith-based organizations. Now, faith-based organizations are a powerful tool. They involve millions of people, not so much in interreligious dialogue, which is a totally different story from intercultural dialogue, and which I gladly give to specialists to do, because they've been discussing for decades with what appears from the outside to seem to be very little progress. But the grassroots influence, contacts of faith-based organizations are too precious to neglect in the name of some desirable secular society which forgets that there is a spiritual dimension. And of course, we need to involve immigrant organizations, because only when they themselves will be part of the process will the process become acceptable in their eyes also, and not the imposition by the majority on the minority. We need to revive the citizens' interest in the European Union, which was an experiment in inclusiveness, still is. But the Union's image has been penalized by the discourse by national politicians. It is not possible that every time a politician goes home from Brussels, everything which went right was thanks to him. Everything which went badly was imposed by Brussels. This is not true. It is not fair. And it is making the image of the Union unacceptable to citizens, especially in the peripheral countries. This may not be perceived perfectly in Brussels, where you live in a kind of Euro bubble, and you think that everybody knows what the next directive which the Commission is preparing. It's not true. Everybody does not know what directive the Commission is preparing, and the European Union needs to develop new forms of communication, which I think need to be much simpler and closer to the citizen. The budget of communication for the European Union is hundreds of millions of euros. If a private company were spending that money a year and had such a bad image, they would fire the director of communication. I'm not sure we're firing the right people. We need to communicate the advantages of the Union and what the consequences would be if there were no Union. The UK is realizing it already now. They have to renegotiate some 40 compacts for international trade before they leave. It is very complicated to get out of the Union positively. Somebody reminded me that in 1998, Greenland opted out of the Union. That means 20,000 people, a few million tons of cod. Getting them out took 3 years. How long will it take for Britain to walk out? I think 3 years would be very optimistic. So, Europe can teach the ethics of citizenship in its communication, because that is what it's good at doing, defending ethics. But it's not communicating this ethics in the way it should be. It should be natural for a European citizen to look up to the European Union as an example of best practice, as an example of good politics, of good management, not as an example of failed democracy, which is imposing the wrong solutions on member states. What have we done in the ICLS? We've tried to make the road to inclusion in citizenship easier for the minorities. We go to cities of diversity, as we call them, which are cities with large immigrant minorities. We select a group of 20 young people who are potential leaders. To do this, we involve the church, the mosque, the university, the city council, local organizations, and we select few potential leaders, future leaders. Then we take them away from their everyday life, from their comfort zone, and we put them in what we call a civilized framework to disagree. So we make them discuss their respective values, the things that unite them and the things that divide them, the techniques of leadership and of conflict resolution, and we make them discuss the image which the media depict of the other and its possible reality or irreality. Very often the image of the media is built up for some political objectives. It is not necessarily an exact photograph of what the other is. What do we use as tools? We teach emotional intelligence. How do you elaborate your feelings towards other people? How do you come into contact with other people? How do you use empathy? If you are a future leader, how will you create consensus for your ideas? How do you negotiate? You know that there is a science of negotiation. It can be taught. We know that in negotiation there is an area of agreement. I start from here, you start from there. We don't have to meet exactly in the middle. We will meet somewhere in between in accordance with how good one or the other party is at negotiating. This we try and teach. We try and make them understand the differences can be overcome and how you manage change. Managing change is a science. It exists in companies, it exists in society. It can be taught again. There are principles, hundreds of books. We try to give these young people a short 4-day masterclass in leadership skills. We've done some 30 seminars like this over the past 10 years. We've trained 500 young people with assistance from the European Commission. And now what we want to do is we want to give our methodology on an open basis to the governments if they want it. Our next step will not be on training leaders. Our next work will be on preventing radicalization, because we think that this is now the current emergency. Why? Because a new force has grown, which is using radicalization to combat our way of life, our civilization. It is doing it in a very scientific way. If you go and look at the films on YouTube, which ISIS is disseminating, they are very well done. They are produced by good scriptwriters, they have good filmmakers, they have good camera operators, they are very convincing. Indeed, they are much more convincing than the old Al-Qaeda discourse. Do you remember Al-Qaeda discourse, what they used to do? You could see Osama bin Laden in a cave. He was a monk of the Islamic Revolution, ready to go out and die for the cause. It was very difficult to convince somebody who's on his iPhone in Birmingham to go and die for the cause in a cave. But it's easier to say, You will be a hero, you will grow a beard, we'll give you a Kalashnikov, we'll pay you a good salary, we'll give you women, you can be a hero until you die and you go to heaven. If you're a disenfranchised, unemployed in some extreme periphery of Europe, this might be a discourse which resonates with you. If you're a woman, they will tell you, oh, come to Iran or Iraq at the border and come to the refugee camps and you will bear the children of the heroes. It's so simplistic and it's so attractive in some cases. We need to fight this kind of discourse and we need to fight it scientifically. What I mean, we need content which does not exist today, which if necessary in politically incorrect forms, counters this kind of propaganda. We have to put our money where it's needed in producing internet content, YouTube content, social networks, newspapers. We need to make the very idea of leaving your future here as a Western-born young person to go and die on the killing fields of Syria, or blow yourself up in the metro, or go and destroy the Bataclan. We have to make this very thought ridiculous. Of course, this doesn't mean that we have to stop the police investigations. We can't stop the counterterrorism work, but we also need to promote those basic European values in a positive way, which make it difficult to go and become some kind of crazy terrorist for a war which is not even yours if you're a European citizen. We need, meanwhile, to reassure the majority. The majority goes towards the far-right, xenophobic extremist discourse because they are afraid. We need them to be reassured that the right things are being done to keep them safe. This includes processing immigrants more rapidly when they come into our countries. A very efficient country like Germany still has 500,000 pending applications. Italy probably has as many. That's too many. There's too many people being held in a kind of limbo. We have to improve the processing of immigrants so we don't hold them for too long, in very bad conditions often. When they violate the law, we need to speed up the legal process. We cannot have a non-resident, non-citizen with no residence permit who commits a crime walking around waiting to be tried. This is perceived by the majority as dangerous. And indeed, when a non-citizen commits a crime, do we have the courage to say that he or she should not be treated like a citizen with the same privileges in the sense? Of course, they have a fair trial. Of course, they purge their sentence. Do they then stay on our territory? Or do we have a European system to take them home, wherever they came from, because they are undesirable on the European territory? Again, this is politically incorrect. This will raise many eyebrows. But we have to come to grips with reality. Reality is that, as you were saying earlier, Nela, at the periphery of Europe, people are in a different frame of mind from what they are at the center. They're angry, they're tired, and they could react by throwing themselves in the arms of undesirable political factions. Now, to conclude, intercultural dialogue, of course, could be used in the relation between majority and minority, but it could be used in many other frameworks. Think of football matches. I can no longer accept that in my country, every weekend we have 30,000 police trying to keep order at football matches. In a previous life, I was responsible for the prevention of spectator violence in Europe. And again, there we needed to involve the so-called stewards, the ones who control the mass of supporters, in making them understand that it's not because you follow a different flag that on the other side of the stadium is your enemy. Otherwise, every weekend we have a repetition of a war situation with the excuse of a football match. So we need intercultural dialogue in that context. We need intercultural dialogue in schools, of course, because more and more, especially in primary, we find diverse classrooms, and teachers very often don't have the necessary training. This training has to be developed, it has to be made available to the teachers. And then, of course, intercultural dialogue in politics, that's a big story, but it means the selection of our politicians has to be along the lines of those who will be effective also in terms of intercultural dialogue. I've tried to encapsulate what it means to be a European. I wrote this during the Year of the Citizen 2013. I would like to leave it for reflection while we take questions, if you're kind enough to put any questions to me. And I hope you enjoyed this short presentation.
Muchísimas gracias, Guido. Creo que no nos has defraudado para nada, todo lo contrario, por lo menos a mí. Y bueno, pues da mucho que pensar, ¿no? Las reflexiones que nos ha transmitido Guido. Algunas de ellas sí que le pedí ser un poco provocativo, y aunque de manera muy elegante, pero lo ha sido, si analizáis su discurso, seguro que a nadie ha dejado indiferente. Algunas de las medidas o propuestas que haces no dejan de ser políticamente incorrectas, pero muy cercanas a la realidad, y aportando además soluciones, ¿no? que es lo que también intentamos hacer con estos cursos. A mí se me ocurre una pregunta, como siempre, para romper el hielo, y sobre todo porque tú te mueves en una organización, el secretario general del Intercultural Communication and Leadership School. Muchas de estas medidas que propones necesitan un coraje especial para ser tomadas. Y me pregunto, ¿hasta qué punto esta situación que estamos viviendo ahora en Europa es falta precisamente de esa falta de coraje y de liderazgo que tenemos en la Unión Europea? Porque vemos que la sociedad, la ciudadanía se moviliza en diferentes líneas. Los malos se movilizan y parece que están siempre más preparados que los buenos. Los buenos se movilizan para ayudar a los que necesitan, pero los que realmente tienen que tomar las decisiones parece, o por lo menos es ese sentimiento que yo capto de las diferentes conversaciones que tenemos y también sale de tu presentación, parece que no llegan a cumplir las expectativas de la ciudadanía. ¿Qué podemos hacer? O si estás de acuerdo en que la falta de liderazgo puede ser una de las grandes causas, ¿y qué podemos hacer para superar ese gran defecto, Porque claro, en el pasado sí que teníamos esas estrategias, ¿no? Muy bien montadas para saber cómo manejar, entre comillas, orientar a la sociedad. Ahora mismo parece que vamos un poquito a la deriva. Y por supuesto, el espacio, la sala está abierta para otro tipo de intervenciones o preguntas. Sí, ahí.
Hola, mi nombre es Ignacio. Bueno, antes de enunciar la pregunta, quiero que se tenga en consideración que el marco, digamos, en el que piensa la Unión Europea es esa Unión Europea de la igualdad y de la justicia. Y bien, antes de ir a mi pregunta, voy a enunciar 3 hechos que abarcan un periodo histórico de más o menos, digamos, de 10 años, creo, a los que usted se ha referido, digamos, y que voy a intentar ejemplificar con algo concreto, con tres casos concretos. Primero, la creación de muros fronterizos en Europa, especialmente en el caso español, digamos, es significativo porque no solo somos una frontera real europea, donde se creó un muro fronterizo que, digamos, no fue impulsado, digamos, por los nuevos populismos, digamos, sino por lo que se consideraría o por lo que se considera en Europa un partido progresista de izquierdas. Ese es el primer hecho. Luego, la guerra, la participación europea en la guerra y en la destrucción de dos países concretos, digamos, los casos recientes de Libia y Siria. Sí, y tercero, el debate que ha surgido hace poco de la suspensión de la libre circulación de personas en el espacio europeo. Estos tres casos nos muestran a Europa como un jano de dos caras, como una persona, digamos, como un sujeto que nos dice, digamos, nos defiende unos valores en los que todos estamos, digamos, más o menos de acuerdo, que son el marco de los derechos humanos y que impulsamos y que nuestras instituciones, y bueno, como hemos podido ver en estas conferencias, creo que hay cierto consenso en que todos estamos de acuerdo en que se deben defender y se deben impulsar. Pero, sin embargo, digamos, nuestra práctica política muchas veces nos muestra una realidad contraria, una realidad contradictoria, en el más o menos como un Jekyll, un Mr. Hyde, un maltratador que nos dice que lo está haciendo por nuestro bien o algo así, ¿no? Y simplemente eso.
Well, it's a bit more than that, I believe. I believe that we have lost the sense of urgency, which was present at the end of the 1940s and in the 50s, the sense of recreating a common space for civilized coexistence in Europe. We are going back to the first slide which I showed you, where states are again taking over on an egotistical agenda instead of letting the Union negotiate, discuss, decide. I urge you to read the manifesto of Ventotene because it already foresaw this, that eventually the states would come back with their egotism and with their internal agenda. You're right, we are preaching in one way and we are acting in another way. Libya is a tragedy and we will pay the cost of Libya. But Libya was not decided by the people of Europe. Libya was decided by the leaders of Europe. And I think that the leaders of Europe today bear a great responsibility for the moral crisis of the Union, but also for the economic and social crisis in which the Union is quickly going to fall into if we don't take extreme measures.
Yeah, my name is... ¿Se oye?
Sí, sí, se oye, se oye.
Sorry about the glasses too. It's kind of in the same line. I guess that the core is in the media discourse, because the same media that are stereotyping the immigrants are stereotyping those civil rights groups that works with them. For example, I know a few collectives in Madrid, they already teach Spanish lessons. They give intercultural practices and give jobs sometimes to them, but in the press and on TV, they call them ocupas. And once they try to organize themselves, they call them populists. So maybe, I don't know if it's possible, but all those billions that you were talking about promoting the European Union maybe should be directed somehow to fight this discourse, to get in the core of this discourse and what's the name? Unstabilize this discourse, you know what I mean? And in the other hand, I have a question about the training that you do. For example, where do you get those young people to train them for? Because in those collectives that I know, for example, there are a lot of brilliant young people, and they could use this, you know, but they're not going to knock at the European Union door because they have too much work to do at their young ages. So is there some type of tactical move to go there directly? Because I think that's the best media strategy to the European Union itself. Because it fights on three sides, the media discourse, the radicalization of immigrants, and the radicalization as well of working class people. Thank you.
Okay, I think your questions are all perfectly legitimate, but the first one has to do a lot with the relationship between the European Union, or rather the European Commission, and the world of NGOs. Many of us in NGOs are fed up of working for nothing for the European Commission. It is expected somehow that NGOs will come up with voluntary work to solve highly complex, highly delicate social problems with very little funding. And even the mechanisms of funding are so complex and demanding at times that people would prefer not to apply for funding rather than go into a nightmare of bureaucratic accounting. I obtained a funding for an operational grant for 10 years. And we spent all that money in training the young people. I will tell you later how we select them. But of course, we know that there is the need for what we call a critical mass of trained young leaders. I trained 500. I've reached the limit of my capacity as a private individual. I think the states, through the education system, through the training structures, need to train thousands of young leaders. But only governments can do this with a voluntary move by them. They have the resources, they have the structures, they have the credibility. As for the selection of the young people, what we do, as I said, we call together the local actors as far as we can contact them. We've often contacted universities, the church, the mosque, local associations, and the city council. We ask each of them to bring forward a certain number of names, and we ask these young people to respond to a questionnaire. On the basis of the questionnaire, we make a selection, and we try and organize a group which is balanced by gender, balanced by profile, and which we hope will usefully generate internal discussion. So the selection process is quite transparent, but I think at the same time, the methodology is there. We are prepared to give it for free to whoever wants to use it. The only thing we ask is to be able to monitor the way in which it's used so that it is not destroyed by a wrong application.
Una última pregunta aquí que habíamos dejado antes para cerrar.
Okay, thank you. My name is Bianca, and I'm a daughter of immigrants. I'm an immigrant also, and I wanted to thank you for the really enlightening discourse you took right now, because it's really helpful. And as you said, like, there are lots of people that do bad things, and all of us take credit for it, which is not really fair. And my question was about that your initiative. You now want the governments to take part in it. Do you really think they would like to, or make it really happen?
Well, we don't want the governments to take part on an equal footing with us. We want governments to use the methodology under their own rules. I do not put myself on the same level as a government. But the institutional educational system, I think, has to use the product of the work of civil society to the full. Very often, Miguel knows it very well, that we are asked to respond to questionnaires from Brussels and from the various higher organizations of the state. We respond. Our collective wisdom is somehow distilled into a document which goes to governmental experts, and we never hear any more about it. So yes, I'm happy that you feel vindicated by the fact that not because one immigrant is a delinquent, they all are, but we also need the immigrant organizations to speak up in this respect and to make sure that they condemn the deviant behavior by the individual, which makes the image of hundreds of thousands of honest people unacceptable.
Muchas gracias. Como te quité la palabra el otro día, te la concedo. Steve, la última intervención.
Of course, it's excellent what you are doing, but on the other hand, two buzzwords very fashionable at the moment everywhere in the union, on local level, national level. And the two buzzwords are leadership and new narratives. to a certain extent, I do have the impression, also from personal experience, that this leadership fashion is not leading to any leadership. It's leading to the impression that certain people can learn to have a better position in society because they are trained to use a certain talent. In the Netherlands, the Ministry of Culture now have spent €1 million for a project called Leadership in Culture. This money is thrown away. I don't mind that they threw it away, but basically, if you opt for a civil society based on the individual who wants to take responsibility for his or her personal life, then you can become a leader on your own cost, in your own house, with your own friends, and in your own environment. So we are not looking for leaders to tell you what is wrong or good. You are going to tell those who have a position to take more responsibility than yourself can do by yourself, how they should behave in ethical terms, in managerial terms, in communication terms. So the problem one wants to lose with leadership courses is the problem of the lacking responsibility of the individual member of society. Therefore, I say, concentrate on the individual capacity of all the people sitting here individually and are using the money for all kinds of smaller support programs to find partners, to have civic initiatives, and to empower society to use this enormous talent capacity which is not used so far.
Yes, I think you're perfectly right. Indeed, we had created a term for this. We called it civic diplomacy, which did not exist, but which I think needs to be developed. And we are not creating leaders. We are teaching leadership skills. We are equipping people who already have leadership potential with the necessary tools to arrive earlier. Why are we doing this? Because very often in immigrant communities, the heads of the communities are very old people, old like me, and they have prejudices and they have positions to defend. What is lacking is the bridges between the majority and the minority. What we ask our alumni to do is to create what we call networks of trust, networks which can be activated when there is the risk of degeneration of community relations in a given area or a given city. In a city like Bradford, we started in 2001 because there were riots and they burned bits of the city down. We tried to develop the courses there to rebuild trust between the two communities which were no longer speaking to each other.
Muchas gracias también por tu contribución, que en parte también respondía a la duda que planteaba al inicio, y un gran aplauso al ponente.